non più tra i farfalloni amoroso, notte e giorno di torno girano, delle belle turbando al riposo.
And the Oscar goes to...
The Oscars have always had a tendency to be stuck between one of two animated movies each year. One that tends to be a unique, dramatic art house film.
I'm so happy, Michael. I've waited for someone like you my whole life.
I've waited too.
And the other being from Disney.
Very, very exciting. I was up late last night figuring out a new plan. Here it is. Fear.
That's not to say that Disney hasn't made some spectacular films deserving of an Oscar, but come award season there's definitely a bias among critics and arguably audiences. It's why so few films have won Best Animated Feature outside of Disney movies, and it's why in 2021 we're once again faced with the same question we face each year. Will Disney win the Best Animated Feature, or will it be the art house film? Now the people at Flickr have already placed their bets on who the winner's going to be.
Soul.
Yeah, it's Soul.
But let's take a trip on the way back to a year when the Oscars didn't even consider Disney cartoons. Let's take it all the way back to 2011. This was a year where, for once, every single animated film nominated had a chance of winning an Oscar. You had a Guillermo del Toro DreamWorks mashup, not one, but two foreign language films, a film that Charlie Kaufman worked on so it's okay to like it, and the winner of the bunch. This is a hidden gem of a movie. Directed by the man who gave us Pirates of the Caribbean and The Ring, each piece of this movie oozes with creative vision. But why didn't the Academy give at least a nomination to Disney that year? After all, their most successful movie of 2011 was the second highest grossing animated film that year. Yeah, Cars 2 is widely regarded as Pixar's worst feature, and easily one of the worst Disney movies out there. And considering it just came off the success of 2 consecutive Best Picture nominations, people weren't even pleased with this at the time. So, in honor of the never-ending competition between Disney and everyone else, let's take a look at the most highly acclaimed animated film of 2011, and the highest grossing animated film of 2011. Was that Panda beat him? How did I know? Both these movies do admittedly have a talented cast of voice actors at their disposal. With one exception that I'll get to in a bit, every actor is proven to have an expressive range throughout their careers, and in some cases these movies. And it definitely helps that some of the actors fit their roles really well. Ned Beatty, Michael Caine, Will Nye, these actors certainly play their parts and play them well. But while typecasting has certainly led to some great characters over the years, it's equally as important to create a new character from your performance. When it comes to the acting from Alfred Molina, Isla Fisher, and even John Turturro in Cars 2, the voice work is far different from what you'd expect to hear come out of their mouths.
You ain't from round here, are you?
Each actor in these movies, but especially in Rango, exaggerates their voices to breathe a unique life into their characters. This allows the animators to figure out how to draw the inflections and personalities of each figure when they move. And the story of how they capture these inflections is far less interesting in Cars 2 than in Rango, where the voice actors were given a real-life set to move around in and interact with each other.
Instead of motion capture, it's kind of emotion capture, using the actors as a reference for the emotionally animated character.
This is why the main character of Johnny Depp's Rango is so fun to watch. The animators had a base to model off of whenever he moves, exaggerates his body, or even does something as simple as quit moving and say a one-liner.
I stand corrected.
What also helps sell this character is Johnny Depp's range. Watching Rango, I heard emulations of Clint Eastwood.
Your pappy and them boys are about to hang for something they didn't do. But I've got a plan.
Jim Henson.
Help! Open the door!
And even a tiny bit of Depp's playful, slightly improvisational work as Jack Sparrow.
That's interesting.
Somehow, he manages to balance it all to make a cohesive performance that's easily one of the best of his career. And I cannot in good conscience say the same about... Now, I'm not going to say that this was a bad choice for the part of Mater. What I will say is that there was one comedic, intentionally annoying side character that I loved as a kid. Donkey. What works about Donkey is that despite his ramblings, he still feels like a living, breathing creature because his whole body moves with him when he emotes. You can't say the same about Cars 2's lead because the only parts of the car that move when he expresses himself is the eyes and the mouth. And this leads us to perhaps the most important element of a well-animated film. What makes for good animation? A little too much. Okay, what makes for bad animation? It's too easy to point out the cheaply rendered, poorly developed cash grabs that dominate the box office each year. But for once, I'd like to argue against Rotten Tomatoes and say that even a movie as polished as Cars 2 actually isn't as visually appealing as any other Pixar movie. Because unlike The Incredibles and Ratatouille, what it has in polish, Cars 2 lacks in personality. When a writer or director builds a cinematic world, whether it's through a drawing, a computer, or real life, they're taking the time to convince the audience of that world's atmosphere, pace, and feel. The animated features that stick with us don't just offer up laughs and pretty pictures, they offer up ideas that contribute to that world. Cars 2 may look pretty on the surface, but it doesn't offer up an atmosphere or vibe other than cute. On paper, it's a send-up of spy thrillers, but it doesn't have the gritty, grainy aesthetic of one. It just screams generic Illumination car movie. The problem with modern Pixar movies like this, even the good ones, is that they feel tailor-made to be cute and marketable. They never push their designs past this, and as a result become oversaturated with everything else. You pay for your ticket, eat your popcorn, and forget about it a few hours later. Rango stuck with me from the moment I saw it because it's the complete antithesis to that idea of cute and inoffensive. Every character model, prop, weapon, and grain of dust in Rango is given a specific quirk and weight to it that you just don't see in Cars 2. While both movies are send-ups of different movie genres, Rango is the only one that uses visual language to do so. The atmosphere is dusty and gritty. The light is bright and contrasting. The animals have wounds and unique wardrobes. The jokes are often visual gags, making use of the frame and composition, whereas in Cars 2, the joke is usually an obvious verbal exchange.
How about that pistachio ice cream?
No, wasabi.
Oh, same old. What's up with you?
Shut up! Speaking of compositions, the shots within the movie utilize classic Western showdown imagery to develop a sense of epic scale and grittiness that makes it stand out from your next kid-friendly animal movie. And sure, Westerns may not be the first thing on your mind when you're scrolling through Netflix nowadays, but there's a mythic cinematic structure to the way Westerns like Rango build themselves up. The compositions of their showdowns, their visual cues, their musical cues, their sense of life or death at every corner, it's just pure visual storytelling, no strings attached. Cars 2 doesn't have pure storytelling. There are no creative transitions, no visuals that speak for themselves, no ways of telling the story that don't require explaining it to you. The stories of both of these movies are interesting because as different as they are, they have a few key similarities. While Rango is a remix of a variety of classic westerns, it also pays homage to the detective classic Chinatown through its side story about a conspiracy to control the water supply of a town. It has a reveal of who the bad guy is, a set of characters with differing codes of honor, and murder, death, and injury. If that sounds familiar, it's because Cars 2 follows a similar pattern in its structure and plotting. Truth be told, both of these plots can be a bit much for a kid to wrap their head around, but at least from my perspective, I understood Rango a heck of a lot better as a kid than I did Cars 2. This is because Cars 2, as mentioned earlier, doesn't lay out its story visually. Take the climactic moment of each movie. Most of this scene involves the lead character explaining the movie's mystery of the bad guy to the other characters, and by extension the audience. The key difference between them is that you can watch the one in Rango with the sound off and understand that the mayor is controlling the water through the pipe system. Many of the compositions emphasize the relationship between the townspeople and their need for water, the water and the villains controlling it, and the villains controlling the townspeople. As Kuleshov and Hitchcock put it, placement of these shots next to each other creates a new idea within the viewer's minds. It's an effect known as montage. But the Cars 2 scene uses characters learning about the plan in a different way. To tie it back to Hitchcock,
It's like a lot of films one sees today. Not that I see very many, but to me they're what I call photographs of people talking. And bears no relation to the art of the cinema.
like a lot of Oscar bait, most of the ideas that the movie wants to communicate to you come through the character simply explaining the information, not showing it. Granted, there's a few visual cues in the villain being cornered by a bomb-toting mater, but the majority of the scene has characters explain the details of the plot, not show us. The details involve an alternative fuel conspiracy, connected to a race, connected to a story about friendship, but none of these details or their relationships are conveyed through the composition or framing like in Rango. The one flashback scene they show to develop these ideas doesn't show what he's talking about.
It was you leaking oil at the party in Japan. You just blamed it on me.
Without the voiceover to spoon-feed us the information, we wouldn't get what the movie's trying to convey to us. And it shouldn't be spoon-feeding us, because the plot of Cars 2 is actually kind of complicated. You might say I shouldn't take the story seriously because it's for kids, but if it's for kids, then why is this a complicated story being conveyed in a way that only grown-ups paying attention could understand? If the movie's trying to appeal to both demographics, then it's still not as good at this as early Pixar and Rango. The best Pixar scene, the one that got them their first Best Picture nomination, is pure visual storytelling. What's great about it is that it uses the language of cinema to convey, without words, a very adult idea about losing a loved one. It's done in a way that both kids and adults can understand and appreciate. I'm not going to buy the idea that Pixar's bad movies should get a pass because they're made for kids, because tons of adults I know who've seen Spirited Away, The Incredibles, and yes, Rango, think that they're great movies, not just great kids movies. There's plenty more to be said about the state of modern animation and how many of the more thoughtfully made animated films are being pushed further and further away by the cutesy pandering stuff, but I'll end on this. Remember that Hitchcock interview from earlier? Let's finish it.
And the point is that the power of cinema in its purest form is so vast because it can go over the whole world. A film can play in Tokyo, West Berlin, London, New York, and the same audience is responding emotionally to the same things. And no other medium can do this.